Good morning. I am Steve Weber. Welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show on Wednesday, February 24th. Yeah, we're going to have a fun show today. Victoria Reynolds comes back to the American Gumption Morning Show. She first was here at the very end of December, in between the week of Christmas and New Year's. And so, she's part of the Spirituality Gone Wild team of co-creators. She's got her very own show. We'll tell you all about that. But her and I are going to have a conversation on spirituality and religions and some of the differences and some of the foundational similarities between them. So we'll get into all of that in about 15 minutes. All righty. Now, my monologue today, in tying in with what we're going to talk about, is I'm just going to talk about Catholicism as foundation, Catholicism as foundation, and that's my own personal foundation, and so anyway, I'll just sort of lay out that beginning and evolution thoughts that I have. Just a few random thoughts, not random. I wrote them down. I've got a sheet full of ideas. I'll go through and share with you. So nothing's random around here on the American Gumption Morning Show. All right, let me tell you what's happening coming up this week. So tomorrow, Andrew Heschbacher returns one more time. He was here at show number 38, September 25th, when he was in the middle of riding his bicycle across America. He's completed that journey, and he's going to tell us about what that experience was like. And I'm titling it "When Life Gives You a Pandemic. When life gives you a pandemic, go out and take a bicycle ride." And that's exactly what Andrew did. So he'll tell us about that tomorrow. Jay Toops will be here on Friday. Jay was scheduled last Friday. We had to cancel that at the last minute. So anyway, he's going to come back, and Jay has an idea that could revolutionize the way we treat our trash, our garbage, our waste carbons, and turn that into alcohol fuels, clean alcohol fuels. So we'll get into that. It's kind of a big topic. And I've known Jay for several years. He's been working on this project, and it's a big project. So we're going to get into that on Friday. All right. Next week, I already have 3 guests. I won't bother going through who they are now, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we have guests scheduled, and probably going to have a guest on Monday and Friday too. But, we won't announce those until they come out, but I'll tell you about our guests, tomorrow and Friday, who's coming up next week. Alrighty, that's it. So let me go ahead and shift gears and get into my monologue. And again, I'm titling today, it's Catholicism as Foundation. And it's really my foundation. It's what I grew up, being taught and believing, because we believe what we're taught. So anyway, I ended up going to Catholic schools for 12 years. It was part of my childhood home, the Catholic religion. And I remember asking questions like, why do we believe this? And, why do other people believe other things? And it would just be, the answers were because that's what we believe. That's, that's the foundation. So anyway, that was kind of the beginning of my my spiritual and religious trainings. It was all in Catholicism. And again, I went to school 8 years to a Catholic grade school, and then 4 years to a Catholic boys' high school. There was a boys and girls high schools right next to each other. But nuns and priests were part of my early life and training and discipline. All right. So anyway, it was Christianity based, and obviously Jesus Christ. But in Christianity, there was the Lutherans, the Protestants, the Episcopalians, and I remember kind of questioning and like, well, what's the difference between Catholics and Protestants or Lutherans? And I never got a very good answer. As a young kid, you ask these questions like, oh, well, they're just different. And then you kind of come to realize that, in time and, people were part of the Catholic Church, and they all broke off because somewhere along the line, people got mad. Men running the churches decided, well, we don't believe that. We believe this. And, we make up our own rules. And so that's kind of how it all, as I became a little more aware, I realized that, okay, in the Christian faith, in the foundation that I was raised in, there was all these like splinter groups, break-off groups, different things. The Church of England, the Orthodox Christians, from the, Russian and Eastern Europe area, they, again, foundation of Christianity and Jesus Christ, but, somewhere along the line, they're like, nope, no, we're not following the Pope in the terms of the Orthodox Christians. All right. So, and then you go back even one step further, and Judaism and Christianity really was, broke off from Judaism at the time of Jesus. So, and then of course I ended up learning a little more about the Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhist, the Muslims. I wouldn't call that Eastern religion. They were their Middle Eastern, foundation there. So all these different religions and groups, and they all had their own different beliefs. And again, when I was a kid and asked about them, the answer was sort of just, well, that's what we believe. Oh, they believe differently. So I kind of came to the conclusion somewhere along the line that it didn't matter what you believed as long as you followed and practiced what you believed. So there was these different flavors of Christianity and, different religions altogether. And I thought, well, this was my pre 2009 realization or thinking that, okay, it's like if you practiced what you believe, then you are being a good person, that sort of thing. I also came to realize at that same time that they all involved rules, and some of the rules didn't necessarily make sense. And I don't know all the rules of all the religions, but again, as Catholicism as my foundation, here's just a couple of examples. I mean, one of the first ones was like, don't eat meat on Friday. You're not allowed to eat meat on Friday. And then all of a sudden, I think it was the Vatican II, and they said, oh yeah, you can eat meat on Friday. It's okay to eat meat on Friday. And, and it's, I was a kid and it was like, okay, cool. You can eat meat on Friday, but it's sort of like also, well, who changed the rules? How come the rules changed? Later on, this is probably around 2000, maybe later, the idea of limbo. And limbo was this rule that Catholics had where if a baby died before the baby was christened, then the baby was in limbo. And, it's like eternal in between. You couldn't go to heaven. You couldn't go to hell. You were in limbo. And that was like a crazy rule. But when they, I forget what Pope it was, decided, okay, no more limbo. And like one day it was just like a decree, no more limbo. All those babies are free to go to heaven. And I was like, well, that makes a lot more sense. Limbo never made any sense. And so anyway, it was just kind of one of those crazy rules that got changed midstream. And so I came to realize that, that these rules were just all man-made rules, and the religions were just man-made, interpretations of what spirituality or what the truth was. And so, and I thought of this, I wrote it on the phrase, who died and made you Pope? As kids, we used to say that, who died and made you Pope? Well, the Pope was like the eternal, representation of God here on earth for Christianity, for Catholicism. And so it was like, kids are like, if somebody made up a rule that you didn't like, or like, who died and made you Pope? All right. More recently, as my evolution, spiritual awakening and evolution of thinking has come around, the whole idea of incarnation, and this is real recent. This is only the last couple of years. And the Catholic interpretation of it is that when you were born, there was no such thing as incarnation. There were no previous lives. But we were taught to believe that you're an eternal being. So after you die, you go to heaven and you're eternally living then. But before you got here, there was no there was no life before that. It was just like poof, poof. You just were made, and I don't know. It just was crazy. So, but the incarnation was like, I was a long time coming around because I didn't have any memory. I still don't have any memory of past lives. And so, that was a hard one for me to come around to, but it never made sense that there was no, like that poof, you just got made here when you were born and then you were eternal, but you were not eternal before that. So that was kind of one of those crazy things. And then, the Catholic Church sex scandals, just the idea of covering up and not necessarily being open and honest about that whole thing, made me go, these are just a bunch of rules that people are making up and it don't make sense. So it's all human and man-made rules, very patriarchal, the Catholic Church, priests, men can be priests, but none, women can be nuns, but priests are at a higher level than nuns. It's crazy. So I guess I came to the conclusion that there had to be some kind of a higher truth. And I remember on, dating sites came around and, right around, I don't know, 2000 something. And, you could check the boxes of what you are, Catholic, Christian. And I remember it was confusing for me because I had kind of moved away from specifically the Catholic Church. I considered myself Christian, but I didn't, they had all these boxes for like Protestant, Lutheran and blah, blah, blah. And then there was a box that said spiritual, not religious, And I started checking that box because that made more sense to me because I didn't feel like I was attached specifically to a religion, but I certainly believed that there was some kind of higher power. And so anyway, that was that. So anyway, that's it for the monologue on Catholicism as foundation. That's today's monologue. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there for kind of as a prelude to what Victoria and I are going to get into. What we're going to talk about with her is her book, Free Your Spirit. But I just thought before, since it's my show, I get to say whatever I want during my monologue, and that was that. So anyway, that wraps up that. Alrighty, well, let's shift gears and let's get into our guest, Miss Victoria Reynolds. Welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show. Let's see, are you? Oh, there you. I'm not pushing the right buttons. I'm still. Oh, gosh. Hello there. How are you?
I'm good. That monologue was great. I know more about the Catholic Church now than I think I ever knew before. Thank you for that. I really don't talk to people about their childhood religions because so much of what I teach streams in straight from source. And I trust that. So it's always fascinating to hear other people's takes on the way they grew up.
Yeah.
I didn't know that Catholics didn't believe in a pre-heaven.
Right. No, there's no such thing as we were specifically. It's like you're not allowed to believe in, there's no past lives. So there is no reincarnation. It's just, or incarnation. It's just like,
incarnation. That's what's fascinating because I grew up with the belief that we existed in a pre-existence and then got plopped here. And then every little mistake you make here as an imperfect human being, you get tormented for the rest of eternity. So,
boy, talk about rules.
To get it right. That's it. So
yeah. So anyway, good. Well, I just thought that was a fun, not fun, but like necessary, thing for me to purge out and just sort of talk about it because there was things that just didn't make sense, but you weren't allowed to question them. And I know your story and let me read the bio. We're not going to play the first time guest song because we did that the very first time you came here, but let me just kind of reread your bio and say who you are. And then we'll launch into Free Your Spirit. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All righty. So Victoria Reynolds is a spiritual luminary, oracle of freedom, ascension activator, story healer, and author. Victoria does what she does because she must. It is her calling and purpose to be a voice of freedom and share her light so that others may see the light within themselves. Victoria was born into a polygamous cult. She was one of 16 plus children. She ran away at age 17. The financial crisis of 2008 was her midlife crisis. Today, she lovingly calls this her midlife rebirth. Love that, midlife rebirth. It activated Victoria's higher purpose and up-leveled her spiritual gifts. Victoria is most proud of the work she's done on herself to find and become who she is today as a voice for spiritual freedom and infinite love. By processing her own suffering, it has allowed her to be the light she is and to assist others in finding their own freedom. And this is very important, Victoria is one of the newest co-creators here on the Spirituality Gone Wild network with her own show, Fearless and Free, live on Friday afternoons, 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So Victoria Reynolds, welcome back to the American Gumption Morning Show, and welcome to the Spirituality Gone Wild channel. So honored to have you back.
Yeah, I'm excited. You guys are pulling me out of my comfort zone. I've been doing pre-recorded shows off and on for years, and doing the live show has been very intimidating. So I did my first one last week and botched it a bit, but it was fun, really fun, and another stretching experience for me.
Well, you did great. I listened in and I thought you did a good job. And I think I might have shared with you that some of the mistakes that we make in terms of just process mistakes, in terms of like getting, some of them like I did 60 shows before I figured out some of these things. So, it just takes time and practice, and there is no right or wrong. It's just all the journey and the experience. So welcome. You're going to do great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited.
All right. Well, hey, let me share my screen and just show what we have here with the books that you got, because you've got a couple different books, and we'll just tell people briefly what they are. So the first one is Free Your Spirit. It's actually not your first book, but it's the book we're going to talk about today. It's the first one I wanted to put up there. Okay. And this is really we'll tell people what this book's about.
This book is it's primarily for people who have chosen to leave religion and are on a spiritual path or trying to figure out what their spiritual path is, and helping them to not feel guilty about the choices that they've made, because once we choose to leave our religious beliefs behind, there's a lot of shame and guilt that can be associated with that. I know that a lot of people experience religious shunning from their families and from their friends. And this is a way for people who have left to really be comfortable with the choice that they feel calling to them. And for me, finding spiritually outside of religion felt like outgrowing religion. And that's a hard concept for a lot of people to understand who haven't gone through that outgrowing experience. And it's really about being able to connect directly to spirit without the middleman of religion. So that's primarily what this book is about, is to help people understand the process of moving out of religion and how to really be at peace with themselves for trusting their own path.
Great. And I get it. I've read it. I like it. And what was really fun is it confirmed so many of the things that I have kind of discovered on my own, but you talk about in a way that made a lot more sense and was a lot more clear. So I'm excited for this conversation. And most of what we're going to talk about today is going to be this, process, these 5 different steps that you describe in your book. And again, I feel like I went through a lot of them myself, but you more eloquently, just lay them out there. And so it's a very nice guide that way. The next book that I'm going to show, whoops, there we go, is really the first book that you wrote, Transcending Fear. And I think you described it as not necessarily written to be a book, but written to be kind of your own, your own processing of what you were going through at the time.
Right. So I published this book in 2012. This was my first book. Well, not my first. I've been writing my memoirs forever. I still need to find an editor for that book, which I wrote like 20 years ago, still needs a publisher. This book I wrote in 2012, and it pushed itself forward because it was my own story. I started this after my 2008, when the world was falling apart around me. And it wasn't intended to be a book. This was actually notes that my higher self, what I call in this book as my inner counselor, my inner therapist, was teaching me how to heal my life after the 2008 economic crash. And so this book was about all of the discoveries I made and about healing my own life. So at the time I had basically lost everything after that economic crash, and I was in the middle of a bankruptcy and a foreclosure, and my kids had both been diagnosed with learning disorders, and my marriage was on the rocks, and I was at the bottom of the pit. And I kept hearing about the law of attraction. And so I wanted to figure out, my whole thing was, I need to figure out how to make money, because I had no income stream at all. And we were ready. Literally, we had one paid for automobile, and we were preparing to be living in the car. And so I started asking myself, how do I make money? How do I make this law of attraction work for me? So that's where the book starts, is discovering that the place to begin is with gratitude. And I started down this whole entire path of how to heal my life, and all these beliefs from my childhood started coming up, because I started to realize the reason had never felt as successful as I wanted to was because these childhood beliefs were still subconsciously running the show. It's about these childhood beliefs coming up and how to resolve them, and how to look at my life from a different perspective. It wasn't a spiritual book. It never was intended to be that process. This was just like writing in notebooks what my higher self, what my inner therapist was teaching me. And when I had all these notebooks, I started writing them in the computer, and I discovered that they evolved into a pattern, and ended up being 7 principles. There's a 7th principle that isn't in there that I can give people. I'm doing a 10-year anniversary edition of this book. It's currently in the publishing process, because a lot has changed in the last 10 years. So I added 1 more principle to it. But this was all about me ultimately, what I discovered is about me reconnecting to myself and my own inner truth and who I really am, rather than the beliefs that were placed upon me as a child. And so it was this process of moving out of fear and desperation, and transcending that to a place of finding peace within myself.
The last book that we have here is a free download, and it's just called Rise Up, and it's really a kind of a guide. And I know you just wrote it in the last year or so, but it's really kind of a guide for what's happening in the world today, in terms of all of the changes that are going on. At least that's my interpretation. Mm-hmm. How do you describe Rise Up?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's about what's happening on the planet right now. We're in the middle of shifting from the old world to new earth. This is a time that's been predicted for thousands of years, and we're actually in it, which is very exciting. So for people who don't understand what it is, this is a very frightening and terrifying time. For those of us that understand that this is our collective up-leveling, our collective ascension, it's a very exciting time to be alive. And this book, I have an entire chapter that's dedicated specifically to understanding terminology of what's happening right now. And it's really intended to be a bridge for people who are religious, trying to understand a lot of the terminology, and people who are spiritual, trying to understand terminology. Because one of the things that the darkness on our planet does everything it can to keep us divided, and what this really, the intention of this book is to unify all of us so that we understand each other's perspectives and move together in unity toward the same result, which is the ascension of humanity.
And you can go to Victoria's website, victoriareynolds.com, to claim a copy of that. So anyway, go ahead and help yourself to that. And I found it very useful. I knew a lot of the terms, and they aligned with my own thinking about them. But then there were quite a few that you defined that I hadn't necessarily thought of or hadn't ever bothered to define. So anyway, it's a great resource. So thank you so much. And I want to say, as we shift into the conversation about free your spirit, that there's a selfish motivation for me having this conversation, because I felt like I didn't have a good way of describing what spirituality really was for me, as opposed to what it had been when I was, thinking of myself more in a religious, my spiritual or my beliefs and, connected to religion. And people have occasionally said things like, well, what's this spirituality gone wild? Is it some kind of a religion? And I didn't have the right or the good answer for that. I knew it wasn't. Like, I knew in my heart that it wasn't. So anyway, we'll just try to unpack some of this conversation. And if we use Free Your Spirit as kind of the guide to go through it, maybe it'll help others too, and it'll certainly be helpful to me. So how's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. So you say in the book, you don't have them as chapters. You have them as steps. And it basically is just a very short introduction. It just sort of lays the foundation. But then each of these, we'll call them chapters or steps, kind of go through a different process. So if it's okay, we'll just kind of go through each of the steps. Does that sound like a reasonable thing for us to do, or do you want to make kind of an opening statement about it? Maybe I should give you that opportunity in terms of.
No, let's go ahead and just go into your questions.
All righty. Well, so the first step is, or first chapter is understanding spiritual freedom. And I think what you're talking about at the heart of it is freedom from fear. So probably fear is where we really need to start, like define fear and how, certainly the religion you grew up in, the religion I grew up in, there was fear-based pieces of that. So go ahead and unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, fear is interesting, and it's in all of our religiosities. Ultimately, at the core of every religion are spiritual concepts, and the core spiritual concepts are all based in love. The reason for this whole human experience is to experience love in our bodies. We are the embodiment of love, and fear is a controller. So fear allows us to experience the contrast of light and dark, which we agreed to collectively as humanity, many thousands of years ago. That's what the parable of the Garden of Eden is about us agreeing to experience the contrast of light and dark. It gives our souls opportunity to learn. If we do believe that we existed in heaven before we came to earth, that heaven is pure bliss, and we wanted to experience and grow as souls. So we agreed to experience the contrast of light and dark and the contrast of love and fear. But fear was never meant to be a great controller of what it has become. It was merely meant to be a medium for growth. And unfortunately, what's happened is that fear has become a means of control, and which is why it exists in all of our religiosities. One of my favorite acronyms for is false evidence appearing real. So we get our minds all wrapped up in what we think there is to be afraid of, when really there really isn't. We're not being chased by lions anymore. We don't have that need for self-preservation, which is what fear really is. It's intended to be a tool for self-preservation. It works with the ego to preserve the species and to preserve our families and to preserve our own lives. But it's been taken and used as a tool for controlling humanity. I use it as an acronym for face everything and rise, because once we understand that fear is a process that we can learn through and that we can rise above. Ultimately, we're all trying to rise into this consciousness that's based entirely in love. We're moving into a reality that's based entirely in love. And when we ascend into that reality of love, fear falls away, because you realize it is just a tool that is attempting to be used against us. And that it really isn't as real as we are being told that it is. What's fascinating is how we're told to fear God, that God is love. There's really nothing to fear. That's all been written into religiosities to try to control us, way back when the religions were created.
One of the ideas that I talked about was uh, initially I didn't have this belief that I had the opposite belief. I didn't have the belief that we were a soul, spirit, energy prior to coming to this time and space, this lifetime. So the idea that we were pure love and everything was bliss, right? The eternal. And then we make a choice to come back so that we can contrast that light and the dark and experience it so that the soul can grow and have new experiences. And that's what the life on earth in this lifetime is all about. Mm-hmm. So once you so it's only been a few years since I came to this, like, oh my gosh, is this even possible? When you start to think of it that way, then you're looking at everything like through a different lens. And mm-hmm. then that's when you can see that lens of like, fear, because what you're saying with the religions is that like you call them like kind of middlemen and like boxes that we get put into and labels. And I even mentioned it like, you have to check a box like mm-hmm. for different, you identify it, and it just kind of restricts everything. So maybe expand a little bit more on some of those ideas.
Yeah, it was funny. I had made the correlation with the checking the box when you were saying that you did that. I started laughing. I was like, oh my gosh, there's the box analogy right there. So religions are boxes. For me, it's kind of like their delivery systems. So you can choose, how you're going to get to source, get to God, and which box you're being delivered in. And a lot of us are just saying, you know what, I just want to throw away the box. I don't like boxes unless they have pretty bows and packages and something yummy inside, because they're so restricting. And some people need those boxes because it gives them a sense of security.
Yeah. And one of the things you said about the boxes is it kind of forces you to attempt to believe in something that doesn't resonate. Talk about like the idea that we have this underlying inner knowing of energy that resonates or vibrates like in a good way or in a not so good way. And so, when we put ourselves into a box, that's where, things don't resonate.
Yeah. And they can feel very uncomfortable. A lot of this is human beings learning how to decipher what is best for them. I don't do right and wrong because it's always about what's best. What is best for every person. And it's about each of us learning how to feel what is best for each of us. And we can tell when we're in a space that's not best for us because it becomes very uncomfortable. It becomes spiritually stifling. So, but I don't think a lot of people are actually taught how to feel what that feels like and ask themselves, does this feel best for me? It just feels uncomfortable, but we don't even know why. And we start to question it. And then we get shut down for questioning because our questions make other people uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked about in my monologue, asking questions, right? You're just a kid, you're like, you just ask a question and you didn't really, it wasn't like my parents or teachers were, they just didn't know the answers to the questions. They did not know the answers to the questions. And so the answer to the question became, well, just because you have to believe that and take it with faith, or, it's just what we believe. And there was no answer. And so then you're like, okay. You realize that you're not going to get an answer, but you were kind of left like wondering.
Right. Right. And as children, we start to recognize that dichotomy of, but I don't understand this. If this is this way, I don't understand why. And they couldn't answer that. And I don't know if the adults in our lives had those same questions. I don't know if this is something that I think, although it is, because what we have is what I call the evolution of belief. So every younger generation questions the beliefs of the generation before that. Mm-hmm. It is part of the human experience. Human beings are curious creatures. We want to know why. And because we're always questioning why, that is what causes us to collectively evolve and not be stagnant. We came here to planet Earth specifically to learn and to evolve and to grow. And so to not allow children to question actually prevents our own collective evolution. But it also creates so much discomfort in the adults in our lives because they don't know the answers to the questions and they're just believing what they've always been told to believe.
The last two comments I'm going to make about step number one, or the first part, understanding spiritual freedom, is the idea of remembering or re-becoming, and then concluding by saying it's just what you just picking up on what you just said: continual growth, introspection, self-awareness, and personal evolution. It's just a kind of a constant thing. So this journey of spiritual awakening is a continuous, continual growth, introspection, self-awareness, personal evolution, but it's also like that remembering and re-becoming, how we were when we came here.
Mm-hmm. Really, because we come in as love in a body. We come in as pure bliss. So when babies, you see them, they're just laughing and they're bubbling. It's because they're still in that state of bliss. They haven't learned fear yet.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Anything last on understanding spiritual freedom, or we'll move on to know the truth about truth?
Let's go ahead and move on.
So I love the very first thing I have here, and this has been so true in my own life. Science, here's what I'm saying. Science grasps spirit better than religion does. So I have been a fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza, his teachings. He is really at the forefront of using science to explain some of this energy that surrounds, we call it spirit, we call it God, we call it whatever we want to call it. But he's the guy who is like, reconnecting science to the spiritual world.
Yeah, I love that science. So for me, it goes back to like Einstein, where he was probably even beyond. If you go all the way back to Da Vinci, they innately understood that spirituality and religion are separate. So I see like a triangle of spirituality, religion, and science. It's this triangle, and religion and science have kind of gone like enemies, but they're really not. But science causes religion to evolve. And the people who have created religion, or not the people who have created religion, but religions themselves are self-propagating entities. They're organisms in a sense. They need to continually live as well. Well, science forces religion to evolve, and that makes controllers of religion very uncomfortable because they have to keep changing the rules. As we know, the rules of religion have to keep changing to keep up with the evolution that's happening with humanity. And so that's why there's always been this animosity between religion and science. But they both are interconnected with spirituality. And when we understand that religion and science aren't actually enemies, that both of them are attempting to explain spirit, then they can actually work together hand in hand, and it doesn't have to be an animosity thing. So spirit for me is synonymous with energy. So energy vibrates at lower or higher vibrations, and fear is very, very low vibration, and love, the higher you go up in love, the vibration changes, and you can feel it in your body. That anything that is fear-based is restrictive and limiting and heavy and oppressive. And anything that's love-based is light and joyful and giving and expansive. And when we start to understand the difference between how those two energies feel in our own body, you can get that spirit is that the higher vibration you go in spirit, and energy is where we all want to be. It's ultimately one of the reasons we came here was to experience a contrast as this great what's the word I'm looking for? Can I find the light in the darkness? Can I find the love within the fear? It was like a contest we had within ourselves to see if we could actually find it, like the treasure in the dark treasure chest, to see if we could find that. And what I like about science is that science is quantifying spirituality as energy. Once we understand spirit as energy, it's much easier to grasp as it not being something that's so far out there we can't access it. Because religion teaches us that God is out there and we can't get to God unless we go through the box of rules that our religions have created for us. Science helps us break out of all those rules and go direct to spirit. So we don't have to have those boxes and those rules anymore, because it's spirit. It's everywhere present. It's inside every single one of us. It's in everything.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of energy is such an important realization. And I remember in my early 20s reading a book on about Einstein, and it was kind of a technical thing, and I didn't quite understand it. But just the whole, at that point in my life, the simplicity of the E equals mc squared, energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. I mean, it was just like, it's kind of like it blew my mind. And it's like, how could something, solid be really broken down to nothing but energy? And so anyway, of course, now science has gone on to prove all this and show that, it's exactly the truth. So what happened, I don't know, back, in times where religions and science got separated. And so now you're seeing them be reemerged. And the church was like, anything to do with spirit belongs to the church, and anything to do with science belongs. And even scientists today, there are certain people, I've done a lot of research in the physics area, and there's people who somebody said, oh my gosh, they said somebody was a channeler, and they discounted what the person said because they were a channeler. And here they were trying to prove the whole energy concept, and it was just like, it's like kind of like missing the point. Anyway, it's complicated, but we're trying to unpack it. We're just trying to come up with answers and make this all work. So back to that, know the truth about truth. Science grasps spirit better than religions. Absolutely. Talk about personal truths versus universal truths. But before you do that, let me just acknowledge we have Chanel listening in this morning. Thank you, Chanel. Bettina has joins us oftentimes, but she says love, faith, everything, and rise. And she also talked about left a comment about her own Catholic upbringing. So yeah, this is I think this is a topic that's ripe with a lot of curiosity and people going, hey, we need a better way of thinking about this, because we know a lot more today than we did 30, 40 years ago. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So personal truth and universal truths.
So universal truths are things like faith, hope, hope in all things. Universal truths are also part of the universal laws, such as cause and effect. That is a universal principle. The law of attraction, if you will, that who we are being attracts into our lives more, that match who we are going through life as, that we get what we focus on. Those are universal truths. That one universal truth is that is love is all that is. That is the universal truth. Once we start to really understand what love is, and that God is the energy of love itself, that God actually is love, then these universal truths, the spiritual truths that we're taught in our religiosity, start to make more sense, because they are universal truths. Peace is within. That's a universal truth. That every one of us is the light within. That is the universal truth. All of our religions teach that. It's just difficult to grasp what the inner light actually is. It's actually our heart's light that aligns directly with the light of source. So those are universal truths. Personal truths are truths that our soul has learned throughout its journey through the cosmos, as I call it. So when we tune in and we can ask our higher selves to teach us, why am I experiencing this in my life? Our own soul can teach us, this is why you're experiencing this particular experience. And our own personal truths are who we are, why we're experiencing life, how to experience the people in our lives, and how to experience ourselves. So the best way to tell the truth from deception, again, is how it feels. Because the truth is always 100% loving. The truth, the greater truth, the universal truth, and our own personal truth will never cause us to feel anything other than love about ourselves. So many of us were raised with this beliefs that make us feel less than loving about ourselves. Self-loathing, guilt, shame, all that stuff. Well, guilt is a little bit different. Guilt is kind of our universe, our inner truth trying to get our attention and saying, hey, you might want to take a look at how you're resonating with this particular thing, because it is really trying to get our attention to take another look at our life experiences differently. But anything that causes us to feel small, belittled, shameful, less than, those are actually infiltrations of fear. Anything that causes us to feel small, anything that causes us to feel hate toward another human being or toward ourselves, all of those fear-based energies, that's an infiltration. It's fear. It's not love. It's not truth. It's actually, fear is the deception. So if we take it back to religion, that's why we're saying that the devil is trying to tempt me. That's what that is. It's the darkness that is trying to draw us into deception so that we don't see the greatness and the light and the love that we actually are. The love, the truth of spirit will always be loving. Our truth will always say, you got this. You can do this. You were born for greatness. And will always want us to see the entire experience through the eyes of love. That's the truth, our own individual truth.
I will I'll give the last word on step number 2, and this is actually just repeating your words from the book, but it says, trust your own truth, choose love over fear. Trust your own truth, choose love over fear. And that's really, that's just a good way of recognizing how we can know whether our own truth is actually what we're in alignment. Are we feeling good about it, or are we not feeling good about it? So are we fearful about it, or are we loving about it? So very good. Well, good. Let's to keep this going. Number 3, chapter 3, or step 3 is question everything. And I know that you say it's your favorite mantra, and let me just sort of throw out all of my notes I have on the chapter, and then I'll let you go whatever direction you want. But you say we're in the information age, but we're really going into the age of discernment, because information is so overwhelming at this point that discernment is the next step in how to deal with all that information. So we need to dig deeper, develop our own understanding, connect to our higher truth, make sense of this bombardment of different perspectives, and you kind of, the last thing is just fear disguised as love, as humanity's downfall. So I threw it all out there. What you're thinking about questioning everything? Why do you say question everything?
Well, now it's become even more so than when we were kids. We were only given access to the information that our parents wanted us to have access to, or and the school systems and our religions wanted us to have access to. But we exist on this planet specifically for the purpose of evolution, of our soul's evolution. And that if we don't question what is being presented, we don't actually grow. We stay stagnant within what was. And so questioning causes us individually to grow, and it causes the collective to grow. The thing that's fascinating about what's happening now, when I started seeing this age of discernment coming a couple of years ago, and it really hit us in 2020, when anybody can have their own YouTube channel, anybody can write their own blogs, anybody can put information out there. And now what started to happen in 2020 is that it started to be censored, so that now it isn't about just everybody. Now it's about what the systems want us to not see, which I find very disconcerting, because that is blocking our ability to grow and evolve by what we're now being told we can and can't see. So I'm a big proponent of that. Yes, every single one of us need to have the ability to speak our own truth. And at the same time, every single one of us now are being called to rise to a higher level of consciousness, which means being able to tune in and ask our inner selves, and ask spirit, ask our spirit guides, ask our higher self, ask God, is this true? Because never before have we had to use discernment the way that we have to now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the news is telling us one thing. We're getting a completely different story on the internet. We're getting bombarded with information from every direction. And it's asking for us to use this discernment muscle that we've never had to use before. And it is part of the soul's evolution through the human experience, is to use this new muscle that is something entirely new in the human experience, and it's necessary for us to rise into the next level of ascension, which is ultimately what we all want to experience.
I love the idea of discernment, and so thank you for introducing that. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's really, it's a choosing. But I like discernment better than choosing, because it's like making conscious choices. It's right. Like looking at things with a thinking mind, with a critical, is this truth, and connecting it to our own inner truth, and testing it against our own inner truth to see if it makes sense. So when I started the American Gumption project almost 2 years ago, when I kind of dreamed it up, it was based on the fact that one day I had the aha moment, the realization that everything I heard on the news was all of this like urgency and and fear-based, using your term, information that they were telling us was so very, very important. And yet I had that moment of realization that nothing that they said had anything to do with my life, and it had nothing to do with anybody's life that I came in contact with on a regular basis. And I went, oh my gosh, this is just like, this is like propaganda, or it's just like what they're calling news is like it's the system just regurgitating, and they all kind of say the exact same thing, and it just made no sense. And so I said, I think people want happy stories. So I'm going to go travel around the country, and I'm going to interview people, and I'm going to tell happy stories and positive stories, because I think there's like a market for that. Now, this is what the American Gumption show. I have aligned with Spirituality Gone Wild. I'm meeting free and fearless people. And so it's like kind of evolving in its own direction, but it was exactly that. And so anyway, what you're talking about is really my own story, but you've articulated it very much cleaner. So we're going to keep going. Feel love everywhere. Feel love everywhere is step number 4, or chapter 4. God is love. And you ask, what does that mean? The whole idea of God as a gender, you kind of talk about that myth. Infinite intelligence, infinite wisdom, that's really what God is. And it's really both the masculine and feminine, which is back to the gender idea. So take it away. Tell us what you feel like you want to tell us about, feel love everywhere.
Yeah, love is everywhere. It is all that is. I had this experience in my kitchen about 10 years ago, and I got to experience what divine love is surging through my entire body. And And that's it's a bliss that is beyond words. There are no words to explain what this bliss felt like. And I've been saying since then, can I go back and experience that again? And the answer is always, but you live on planet Earth. So
Mm-hmm.
in order to experience that level of bliss, it's almost impossible to feel it in human form, because that is the love that we return to when we leave human form. And that is the love that everything is made of. It's the glue that binds everything together. It's the trees and the air and our bodies and the machines that we build. It is everything. And so for us to think that we're separate from it, once we understand that love is everything, not just that it's in everything, but it actually is everything, then we understand that we've never been separate from it. And we never can be separate from it. It's impossible to be separate from it, because it's the very stuff that we're made of. And that what happens is that the love that we feel from other people is actually the love within ourselves that's being reverberated back to us. When we hear the song of a songbird and we feel love, it's actually the love that's inside of us that's being activated. Not and that song that's bringing up the love inside of us, that's causing the love within us to expand. So there's that, and that love does not have a gender. So even when I use the term masculine and feminine, that's not gender. Those are words that we use to explain energies and aspects that exist within every single one of us. So we might use the term man and woman as gender. Love is not man or woman. It is all of the aspects of everything we have labeled as masculine and feminine. Those are just labels that we use, where one of the things within the masculine, within the feminine label is nurturing. One of the labels that we use within the masculine labeling is action. So it isn't that there is an either or. It is that all that is, the I am that I am, is all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we are all that.
Thank you. Be free to trust. And you talk about self-trust being the most difficult thing. And boy, I can attest to that. Learning to trust myself has been the biggest challenge, or certainly one of the biggest challenges. But it's such an important foundational challenge for finding that pure love and unconditional love, throughout the world. So I think we'll wrap up with just like the idea of self-trust. If you can learn to trust yourself as opposed to the external things that we were told that we should trust, that's really where it comes down to as the starting point, or the part that breaks you free. Let's leave it at that and put it that way.
Yeah, self-trust is really, really difficult, because we're taught from the time we're a child to trust everyone and everything outside of ourselves. Trust the government to take care of us. That's actually really funny. Now, knowing what I know about how our systems are set up, we're taught to trust our parents, to trust our religious leaders, to trust the pyramidical structures, the patriarchies, trust everything, but not to trust ourselves. And what's really important for people to grasp is that when we trust ourselves, when we put faith and trust in ourselves, we are actually trusting source.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is this belief that we are separate from God, that we are separate from source, and that in order to trust God, we can't trust ourselves and we have to trust everyone else. It's a complete opposite. Because faith and trust in ourselves is faith and trust in source, in God, in whatever our name is for the I am all creator. Because source is being sourced through every single one of us all the time.
When we listen to our inner guidance, we can always trust ourselves. When we listen to our inner guidance, we can always trust ourselves.
Yeah. And what that requires is that we learn how to set ego aside, because ego wants to be in control of everything in our lives. And it isn't the ego isn't the bad guy. There's so many belief systems that have made ego the bad guy. Ego actually isn't. It's a part of us that's necessary for self-preservation, which is why ego wants to always be in charge, because it's trying to preserve what it thinks is best for us. It's about setting ego aside and allowing inspiration to take the lead. And that in itself requires trust that my inner truth, where I am connected with spirit, is what is best. And ultimately, our inner truth, our inner guide that is always being directed by source, always knows what is best. And it's being able to set ego aside and saying, okay, ego, you're over here. I'm going to allow inspiration to take the lead in my life. I'm going to allow my gut feelings to take the lead in my life. I'm going to allow intuition to take the lead in my life. Because every single one of us, because we have a direct connection to source, has the truth inside of each of us, our own inner guidance system. We're born with it. It actually is our soul communicating with us. So we have to learn how to ask ego to set aside and allow our own soul, our higher selves, our inner truth to be the guide in our lives.
Victoria, we bit off a big chunk this morning. I love this conversation, and I want to say thank you for helping to at least start it with me and our listeners, because this is there were many truths that I was taught that I've come to realize that they weren't things that were my own truths. They were taught to me, and I just grew up accepting them and believing them. And as I evolved and as I grew, and I started looking at them and going, well, do I really believe that? And I ended up taking those truths and kind of putting them in different piles. And it was like, yeah, these ones like really do resonate and are true, but these ones over here, not so much. And then once you decide they're not so much, you have the opportunity to either maybe modify them so that they do become yours, or to just completely replace them with something, maybe an opposite belief. And so that process has taken the last 10 years in terms of like my own growth. And the book that that you've written, Free Your Spirit, really gives a person an opportunity to think about that. And so much of what you wrote resonated with me. We touched on a little bit of all of it, went through it fast. We'll have to have you back again to, unpack it again. But at this point, our time is over. So you'll get the last word.
Well, it really is about letting people understand that it really is okay to outgrow your hand-me-downs. I call them hand-me-down beliefs. And just because that's what our ancestors believed, because they were handed down to them as well, doesn't necessarily mean that we have to believe them. We're rising up into a whole new level of consciousness on our planet. And in order to rise up into that new level of consciousness, we need to be able to question where those beliefs came from and if they resonate with us, because what people believed 5,000 years ago might not apply to this new reality that we're moving into. We are creating an entirely new earth. And those old world beliefs don't apply to this new earth that we're creating.
We have the opportunity
to just drop the hand-me-downs and let them go.
Right. We have the opportunity to discern, as you said. Yeah. So very good. Well, thank you so much, Victoria. This is fun. We'll continue it. You'll be back again sometime. Thank you. I enjoyed it. And good luck and welcome to the Spirituality Gone Wild team. We're honored and grateful that you're part of our group now.
Thank you. I'm loving having this new family to play with.
All righty. Well, thank you. Come again.
I will.
Well, thank you, Victoria. That was really, just really like the opening salvo in terms of like, what is a spiritual life mean today in 2021 and going forward? Because so much has changed in the last, 10 years. for me personally, 20 years for humanity, 30 years for all of us. I mean, there's just so much information that was never available. So we're looking at it, we're deciding, we're discerning, and we're moving forward. All right, let me get out of here, wrap up. I will be back tomorrow with Andrew Heschbacher, who when the pandemic hit, he decided to take a ride across America. So he's going to tell us about that. And then on Friday, Jay Toops will join us. And Jay was listening in this morning, and he said that it was a great discussion. Thank you, Jay, for listening. We will see you on Friday, and we'll talk about your vision for getting rid of our carbon waste and turning it into alcohol fuels and alcohol specialty chemicals, which could be a solution to our energy needs that we have. All righty, that's it, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Whoops, I'm looking for my closing song. There it is. There we go.